Learners, we all know who Mahatma Gandhi was, the sacrifices he made, and his notable contribution to the freedom of India. He was loved and respected by one and all, and so everyone fondly called him Bapu. India celebrates his birthday on 2nd October as a national day, as also 30th January as Martyrs' Day, when the nation stands in silence for 2 minutes at 11 a.m. each year. Members of Parliament and national leaders all pay their tributes to the great soul on both these days at Rajghat, where he was finally cremated. Rajghat has become a tourist spot too. His famous prayers, Vaishnava Janto and Raghupati Raghav Rajaram, along with other bhajans, are sung at Rajghat on both these days. Gandhiji was an apostle of truth and non-violence, yet he, like any other child of your own age, made mistakes. This is a short episode taken from Mahatma Gandhi's autobiography, My Experiments with Truth. The episode deals with some of the mistakes he committed in his childhood and how he atoned for them. He emphasized on the power of atonement, that we should never do anything which we need to hide from others. Sticking to truth under all circumstances was important. After completing this lesson, learners, you will be able to know and you will be able to observe how children learn by imitating others, recognize that children can resist negative influences, differentiate between right and wrong choices, realize the importance of confessing one's wrongdoing, use present and past participles, and write short messages. Coming to the gist of the story, Gandhiji talks about some of the things he did secretly under the influence of his friends. He recounts how he saw his uncle smoke and emit clouds of smoke from his mouth. He was so fascinated that he, along with his cousin, too was tempted to try. Since they had no money, they would pick up the stubs thrown by uncle and experiment smoking. He talks about typical adolescent problems when children think they are grown up and do not want parental dominance. This urge for freedom was so great in them that they even contemplated suicide if they were denied this right. On 2 more occasions, he recounts his acts of stealing. Once he stole some money and another time he stole a little gold from his brother's armlet to pay off a debt. Having done this, he feels he resolved some problems, but it left a deep impact on him. His guilt became a burden when he could not bear, and he decided to atone for it by confessing. But he was so scared of his father. He was, as he confesses, finally he writes a letter confessing his guilt. In the letter, he asked his father to punish him. What was father's reaction on reading the letter? Let's read the story to find out. Learners, read the story once through before we discuss each part in detail. Part number 14.2.1. You may read from the lines, a relative of mine, to I became choked. In this section, we are told how and why Gandhiji tried to imitate a family member. This is a common weakness amongst children to copy certain behaviors of grown-up people, especially when they admire them. Children may imitate their habits, dressing and talking style. Such members become their role models, and children tend to think that whatever they do is right. Children lack the power of discerning. They are at a tender age where they are not able to critically analyze the action of their favorite aunt or uncle or any other family member. This is an episode he narrates a few incidents where he did things secretly. At one time, Gandhiji, along with his cousin of his, became fond of smoking. They used to see one of their uncles smoking cigarette and throw out clouds of smoke from his mouth, which was a fascinating sight. The children did not in particular like the cigarettes, but the smell, it was the smell which fascinated, and it was sheer curiosity which led them to decide to try the same. Those were also not the days when parents gave pocket money to kids. They had no money to buy cigarettes. When what could they do? Their determination to try smoking was great, so they collected the stubs thrown by uncle after finishing his cigarettes. But the stubs did not give them pleasure. They were not always available, and neither could they make big clouds of smoke with them. They had no money to buy new cigarettes. So they began to steal coins from their servants' pocket money. During this time, they came to know that there were certain plants whose stalks were porous and could be smoked like cigarettes. They gathered these stalks and started smoking. A growing child does not get satisfied with one habit. As he grows, he observes a lot of things and wishes to do a lot of things without knowing what is right or what is wrong. What the cousins wanted more than cigarette was their freedom. They were now craving for their independence. Then they did not have to fear parents anymore, nor did they have to seek permission for everything. They wanted to be their own masters. At the same time, they were timid too. They lacked the power of protest or revolt, so the only way from this mad system was to commit suicide and gain eternal freedom. But even suicide was not so easy. They did not know how to go about it. They knew they had to procure poison from somewhere, but how? They did not know about it. Then they heard the dhatura seeds could make an effective poison. They went to the jungle and bought some of the seeds. The next question was about the timing of this experiment with dhatura seeds. They decided to go to the Kedarji temple in the evening, light the lamp and have darshan, and then look out for a corner where they could perform this act. They once again found courage lacking. Their mind raised a lot of questions. What if they did not die instantly? What was the good of committing suicide? Why not suffer this lack of independence for some time? In this state of confusion and conflicting thoughts, they hesitated, but tried tasting a few seeds. They were cowards. They could not face adults. Similarly, they were too timid to face death. To do something daring like this needed extraordinary courage. Both of them went to Ramji Mandir to put their troubled mind to rest and to dismiss the thought of death. Gandhiji says that committing death was not as easy as thinking about it. Thinking was so much easier. But the end of the result of this experiment was that both of them not only dismissed the idea of committing a suicide, but also quit the idea of smoking. It was obvious that when they bid bye-bye to smoking habit, they also got out of the habit of stealing coins from their servant's pocket. They did not need money anymore. Learners, try to note that Gandhiji uses the word coppers for money. Why did he say coppers? That was because copper was used to mint coins in those days. Hope you agree that after having gone through all the hassle, something good ultimately came out of this queer experiment. Looking back, Gandhiji says that ever since he grew up, he never once got tempted to smoke. On the contrary, he considered this habit as barbarous, dirty, and harmful. As an adult, Gandhiji could rationalize and critically analyze what was good and what was bad. He began to wonder why people smoked and why there was a mad craze about smoking in the world. He confesses that he cannot sit in a compartment where people are smoking. He feels choked. So we see how children can make blunders in innocence. They do not understand why they need adults' parents to guide them when they are young. If you have read the poem Child or an Adult, you will realize that adolescent stage is where one thinks one is an adult, but one is not. Neither is one a child. If you look back at your early years, you will realize that you may have made many mistakes at times, not deliberately, but at times deliberately for the sheer joy of breaking rules. Learners, come to the part number 14.2.2 and you may read from the lines, but much more serious to without a confession. Talking about the various mistakes he made in his childhood, Gandhiji says that the incidents he mentioned earlier of stealing coins from his servant's pocket to buy cigarettes all had left an impact on his mind. He had stolen money from his servant when he was just 13 years old. He went on to steal yet another time when he was 15. His brother had to pay back a debt of rupees 25. They had no money to pay off the debt. They also did not have the courage to ask parents. So Gandhiji took off part of the gold from the gold armlet his brother was wearing and sold it off to a jeweler. It may sound easy to do all this, but to bear the burden of guilt is too much. This feeling of guilt was so magnified in his mind that he resolved never to steal again. So now Gandhiji made up his mind to confess to his father. But how was he to do so? He was too scared to speak to his father. He was not afraid of the beating he would get or any other punishment that he would be given. His father had never beaten any child. What Gandhiji feared most was the pain and anguish he would cause to his father. Amidst all this conflict that he was battling within, he also knew that whatever be the case, he had to make this confession. Unless he did that, he could not cleanse his soul. So, we see in this part of the story how important it is to make a confession if one has done something wrong. Not doing so would tantamount to piling up the feeling of guilt, which would be of great difficulty to bear. Learners, come to the part number 14.2.3, and you may read from the lines, I decided to, at last, to, beyond measure. In this part of the story, we are told about Gandhiji, who did all the things to purge all the guilt within. What method of confession did he choose, since he was scared of facing his father? After much contemplation and debate, Gandhiji says he decided to write out a confession in a letter he would write to his father. He wrote the letter confessing the mistakes he had made, and in the same letter he also told him to punish him adequately. He also requested him not to punish himself in any way for his son's offences. He concluded the letter with a promise never to steal in future. His father was bedridden at the time. He was not too well. His bed was a wooden plank. Gandhiji handed him the letter with trembling hands. After handing him the letter, Gandhiji sat opposite the plank, watching with a certain amount of trepidation his reaction. As his father read the note, he saw tears trickle down his cheeks. The tears fell on the paper, wetting it. He had sat up to read the note. After reading, he closed his eyes for a moment and then tore the note. After that, he lay down again without muttering a word. Gandhiji cried too. He could see the agony and the pain on his father's face. His expression left a deep imprint on Gandhiji's mind. He says, if he were a painter, he would have painted a picture of this emotional and painful scene. He could recall the entire scene many years after this happened. So vivid and moving it was. But those tears, according to Gandhiji, cleansed his heart and helped him to wash away his sins. Those tears were tears of a father's pure love. But later, when Gandhiji recalled this incident, he could translate it into an act of pure ahimsa. According to him, when such ahimsa emanates from a pure heart, it has power to change everything around it. And this power has no limits. Gandhiji was rather surprised at this ahimsa of his father, because the father he knew was not that naturally forgiving father. He had thought that his father would scream, yell, and show his anger, say hard and bitter things to him, also strike at his forehead. But nothing of this happened. He was absolutely peaceful. This peaceful acceptance Gandhiji attributes to his own clean confession, combined with the promise never to commit the sin again. His repentance was pure, so it was perhaps able to mold a hard heart too. Gandhiji was sure that his father felt absolutely safe about his son. He would do no such thing to hurt him again. This confession and repentance increased his affection towards his son many times over. So, here we see the power of truth and purity of heart. If one is truly sorry for having done something wrong, a person should not have any hesitation in apologizing. But having apologized, one should ensure that it is not mere lip service. One should live up to one's promise in word and in spirit. Learners, let us summarize the story. Stealing and Atonement is a lesson which is an excerpt from Gandhiji's autobiography, My Experiments with Truth. Gandhiji has given a vivid and honest account of the various flaws of his character, his timidity, his temptations, his guilt, and his atonement. Like any other child of his age, Gandhiji too made mistakes. He talks about the things that he and his relative did clandestinely. They had seen one of their favorite uncles enjoy smoking cigarettes and blow clouds of smoke. The two boys were enchanted by the smoke billowing out from his nose or mouth. They wanted to smoke too, but they were scared of seeking permission from their father. They had no money to buy a cigarette, so they would pick up stubs of cigarette from the ground and try a puff in a secret place. They could neither enjoy the cigarette nor blow a cloud. They were so desperate that they had no qualms in even stealing money from their servant's wallet. This did not give them any happiness, so they expressed their frustration at not getting the right freedom which they thought a child at his age should get. They felt that their wings were clipped. They were also too scared of approaching the father, so the two started contemplating a suicide. But how would they procure poison to commit suicide? That became a new problem. They had heard that dhatura seeds can be poisonous. They went to a forest and collected the wild plant fruit. Now they chose to go to the temple first, offer their prayers, and sit in some lonely place to consume the seeds. But the two were also scared of death. They had no guts to swallow the seeds. They started worrying what would happen if the two did not die after all. The good that emerged from the story so far is that the two gave up smoking altogether. Gandhiji was also suffering from pangs of guilt, and the pain, anguish and suffering was too much to bear. He decided to confess, but he could not face his father. So he hit upon a plan. He would write a confessional letter to his father and resolve not to repeat the sin again. He also pleaded with his father to punish him suitably. His father was ailing at the time. He was lying on a wooden plank which was used as bed. Gandhiji gave the letter to him. He sat up to read it. Gandhiji sat opposite his bed to see his reaction. He thought his strict father would shout and beat him, but nothing of this sort happened. The father shed tears, looked at his son and tore the letter. Then, without uttering a single word, he lay down. Somewhere he had faith in his son that he would be true to his words and would keep his promise. Gandhiji could see that he was indeed suffering from within. Gandhiji did not want to see his father in pain, but he had to make his confession to get rid of the burden of guilt. He remembered this incident as clearly as though it had happened just now. He remembered it all his life. At first, he thought he had seen only pure love of a father, but later he could interpret the act as an act of non-violence and ahimsa. He said there was great power in ahimsa. It could mold and transform people. And this power came from his own act of pure confession. Learners, now what are the important issues? Children have role models in family. They lack the power of discrimination between the right and the wrong. Elders in the family should refrain from any practice which they would not like their young ones to do. Had uncle not smoked cigarette and blown billows of smoke, the two boys would not have got the idea. Too much discipline and strictness is not good. Children should be able to approach their parents fearlessly and discuss any issue frankly. Fear makes a person timid, and timidity leads to clandestine acts, which further raise the temptation and make children commit more mistakes. Gandhiji was scared to ask money from his father to buy cigarettes, so the two boys first collected stubs and gave it a try. Later, they started stealing money from the servant's wallet. Gandhiji also did not mind taking off a little gold from his brother's armlet to pay off his debt. His list of wrongdoings was increasing, and his yearning for freedom too was taking a toll on his mind. The two cousins could not face the world and even contemplated suicide. But such people who are timid also lack the courage of committing suicide. Gandhiji and his cousin thought about it and then gave up the idea of taking dhatura seeds. They wondered what would happen if their plan did not succeed and they did not die after all. Such crippling thoughts discouraged them to commit suicide. Gandhiji was a wrongdoer. When any wrongdoer realizes his mistake, he has the power to seek forgiveness too. He would like to atone for it because the burden of guilt is too much to bear. There are ways of confessing. Gandhiji did not have the courage to talk to his father, so he wrote out a letter telling him what he did and telling him to punish him accordingly. He also promised never to repeat such mistakes. His confession and the manner of his assurance moved his father to tears. Such is the power of pure and noble intentions. He knew he could trust his son, and after this his love for Gandhiji multiplied many times. More about Gandhiji. Childhood. Mohandas Gandhi was born on October 2nd, 1869 at Porbandar on the western coast of India. Gandhi was the smallest child of Karamchand and Putlibai. Young Mohandas's school career was undistinguished. He did not shine in the classroom or in the playground. He was proud of the fact that he had never told a lie to his teachers or classmates. The slightest aspiration on his character drew his tears. He was married to young Kasturba at the age of 13 years. Learners, I think that was about the whole lesson, and you can always surf internet or you can look up your book for more details on Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi. And as I told you, I hope you got some understanding of the story on the whole. Learners, now let us learn grammar, coming to the present participle and the past participle section. Present participle. Learners, try to listen to some sentences. The boy washed his hands in running water. This is present participle. The sleeping child woke up. Now, in the first sentence, running, this is present participle. The sleeping child woke up. The sleeping is present participle. Now, there are some more examples. Present participle, you can look up any grammar book for present participle. Present participle works like adjectives and qualify a noun. The difference is that the words are action words which can be deceptive. Remember, they do not denote any time and they do not undergo any change with the change in a subject of a sentence. Those action words which do not work like true verbs but act as describing words are called participles. There are two participles, the present participle and the past participle. The present participle normally has an ing as a suffix, as I told you earlier in the sentences. Now, learners, try to complete the exercise number 1 given under the present participle section of the lesson. One sentence over there is done as an example. Barking dogs seldom bite. Barking, present participle. Here barking is describing the noun dogs. Coming to past participle is similar to the present participle except that the action adjectives in present participle take an ing after them to give an idea of present tense. But past participle takes on the form of a past tense verb form and yet does not act as a verb. It acts as a describing word. Now, try to listen to some examples and try to notice that. Number 1, examples of past participle. Number 1, the tired traveler sat under the tree. Tired, past participle. Number 2, throw the broken glass away. Broken, past participle. Both tired and broken, if looked at without context, will appear to be verbs in the past tense, but within the context, they are being used to describe a noun. Such verbs which describe a noun are called participles. Learners, try to do the exercise number 2 in the book. Learners, there is also a section of writing short messages. Learners, writing is often a neglected skill in the classroom, and when it does take place, it almost always seems to focus on long texts such as letters and essays. This is extremely unfortunate for a number of reasons. Firstly, during their lives, learners will be required to write a lot, and yet their writing often doesn't truly reflect their language ability. Secondly, writing helps consolidate other aspects of learning such as grammar and vocabulary. When learners are writing, they often have more time than they would if they were speaking, and this gives them the opportunity to think about the language they use and learn from the choices they make. A third issue I want to raise over here is the type of texts we ask learners to write. As I have already told you, these are often quite long, and this in itself is a problem, as the text learners are more likely to need to write are short texts such as messages, notes and instructions. The features of these texts differ radically from long texts, and yet learners seem to be expected to be able to produce short texts with almost no teaching having taken place. One of the most important things to emphasize is that writing texts of any kind requires an understanding of how such texts operate and what they look like. The key to this is exposure to the text types, in other words, opportunities to read such texts. The writing of any text cannot come in isolation. Writing and reading are intertwined, and the best writers are people who read a lot. Therefore, before expecting our learners to start writing texts, whether they are short or long, we need to give them lots of examples and then expect from them to write short sentences or short paragraphs or short messages. So learners, this is all about you. To begin with, it's very important to state it is just that they are short. And because of this, there are a number of implications. Firstly, the use of ellipses, that is, leaving out words as they are unnecessary for comprehension of the text or message. This requires an understanding of the context and a shared understanding between the writer and the reader. Secondly, the register used in short texts tend not to be very formal. This doesn't mean they are informal, but simply that there is usually some kind of relationship between the writer and the reader already. So a degree of informality is normal. Finally, short texts cut to the chase, and the message is key and words are not wasted. This means that messages can appear to be almost rude in nature simply because of the brevity. In short texts, grammar words such as pronouns, articles, conjunctions and prepositions are often omitted. This can be quite challenging for both the learner and the teacher or the guide or the instructor, especially if we have spent quite a lot of time teaching learners how to use such words. It almost feels as if short texts are ungrammatical when in fact this is not the case. Although the words are not written, the reader will automatically reinsert them if necessary. Learners, you need to understand one more thing, is the reason for the note. It's been written not just to tell the reader where the person has gone, but why they are not at the location when the note has been left. This is just for an example. In other words, it's been left for someone to read who would be surprised not to see the person who wrote the note. So there is an underlying message. So these are just some tips for writing short messages. Learners, typically if I were to tell you something about writing short messages, another feature that we often find in short messages or short texts such as notes and instructions is the use of passive. There are two main reasons of this. The first is that what both the writer and the reader are interested in is the action, not the person doing the action. And secondly, the passive is more neutral and almost helps soften the tone that a short text has. For example, please make sure the rubbish is taken out. However, even when the passive is not used, the agent or the person being asked to do something is often left out, usually because the expectation is that it is the reader who is going to read out or to carry out any action that is required. Learners, now try to look into the scrolling text, and it contains certain amount of words. Learners, can you lessen the words so that there is a brief message? Remember, the meaning still needs to be very clear. You might want to change the order of the words as well. For example, the previous message, the message which is given as an example, the message is, "Hi Amit, Rahul phoned and wanted to speak to you, but you were not at your desk. Can you call him back? He says it's urgent." And this is a message which has been left by Swati, some person. Now, If I were to put it in small words or to put in huge brevity, I would like to, put it like this. Amit, I'll put a comma, and then urgent, I'll put a heading urgent. Rahul phoned, please call him back. And at the end, Swati. Learners, there is a section in your book, there is a part in your book 14.4, let us write section, which says and which explains message writing. Learners, Gandhiji wrote a confessional note to his father expressing his feelings. A note can be a message which you can create to give some information. Suppose you have to go to your friend's house and find that he is not at home. What would you do? You could give your friend's neighbor a message to be conveyed to him, or you could write a note and slip it under your friend's door or tape it on the door. A message is that important information which you want your friend to know. Learners, try to consider the given situation, and the situation is Ravi and Abhishek are classmates. Ravi is out shopping when Abhishek comes to his house. Abhishek writes a note, a very short note for his friend. He leaves the note with Ravi's neighbor and requests him to give it to Ravi. Now, the message could be like this. Any date, for example, 11th July 2016 or 11th July 2014, let's say, and the time 4 p.m. or 3 p.m. Then Ravi, I came to your house to return your book. You were not there. I'll come again tomorrow at the same time. Let me know if you will be at home. My phone number is this, XYZ. And this message has been left by Abhishek. So once this message is complete, you write your name. The sender will write the name, or the person who is wanting to send the message or who has dropped the message will write his name at the end. Learners, a message is always brief because it deals with only the important points. It is always clear and accurate. It does not include direct speech, does not contain address, sometimes contains a contact number, has a brief salutation, for example, Ravi, name, very informal. It includes only time and date, carries only the name of the writer at the bottom. Now, learners, try to practice this exercise which is there in your book and which I am giving to you. Imagine that you need money to buy a book for school. You take 50 rupees from your father's shirt pocket without telling him about it. You know that your father will be confused and angry when he finds the money missing. You decide to write a short note to explain to him what you have done and why. Write the note, learners, in about 5 to 6 sentences. So it's very much written that you have to write the note in about 5 to 6 sentences, and it has to be like that. You'll be asked on that pattern only. Learners, I hope you have understood the lesson well. As I tell you every time, each lesson of secondary level English needs your undivided attention. It has its inbuilt English language skills which are required on any learner's part to understand those fully before writing the exam. Also, do read your secondary level English book before sitting for your exam. Best of luck. Thanks.